done any podcasts recently, or?
Recently, let's see. Recently, I've done a few. I've done one with Justin, Pilot to
Okay.
Pilot. Another friend of mine, Scott. He has a
Okay.
really good podcast as well. Although
Okay.
Scott's ran for 3 hours or something like that,
Okay.
and I thought he was going to
Yeah.
edit it
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
And a 737 one, and yeah,
Yeah.
there's been a few. It's
Okay.
fun. It's
Yeah.
fun to do this.
Yeah. I mean, so this is like the ninth episode. I've had. Do you know Captain Ivan Luciani? He's yeah.
I don't actually know.
Okay.
I don't know the name.
Yeah, he, I think he's like a Gulfstream pilot, so his name kind of popped up everywhere. I've had yeah, JPC Van Heist is a popular Instagram account. Yeah, so
Yeah,
a
it's
couple of
that's
them.
the thing. All of this
Yeah,
seems to have come from Instagram.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a fun little community.
yeah,
Yeah, I've seen and listened to many podcasts. When I used to drive to Los Angeles
yeah.
from my home here, it was about a 3 to 4 hour drive, and so that was my podcast time. Yeah,
Okay,
it was good to listen to podcasts.
sure.
But now I commute. I fly, in the back of a regional airline up to
Yeah,
San Francisco. So I don't
okay,
really get that long to listen to podcasts anymore. So
okay,
I need to I need to step up my podcast listening.
okay, okay. Yeah. Um, so I'm just gonna start like with a brief introduction about you and just kind of about yourself, and then I'll like start with the questions. So my guest here is Captain Steve Randall. So Captain Randall is currently a captain on the 737 MAX for Alaska Airlines, and he's had a stunning career as a ferry pilot, and he's published his own book about his experiences as a ferry pilot, and I'll link that below. And he also has his own blog and Instagram page, which I'll link in the description as well. And yeah, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you and like about your time as a ferry pilot and about your current job at Alaska Airlines. So the first question I just like to usually ask everyone who comes on the podcast is like why'd you make the choice to become a pilot, or like why aviation in general?
Well, thank you. That was a very nice introduction. He's also a man that likes his coffee, so I'll be
Yeah,
slipping for my coffee every now and again.
yeah,
Mm. But I don't. I think I'm probably the same as many that I needed a spark. I needed something to lead me to aviation. It wasn't something that I was aware of when I was very young. But it actually happened for me when I was around 9 years old. And at 9 years old, I went on a school trip from the south of England, and we went out to the Channel Islands just off of the coast of France. And we were supposed to go to the island of Guernsey, which is one of the three main islands. And we were on an old sort of 1950s old turboprop, a Handley Page Herald. And so we got on board this airplane, and it was interesting. The takeoff was interesting. It piqued my interest, but no spark. It just was a very interesting experience. And but the thing that really did light the fire below me is that when we came in to try to land in Guernsey, we couldn't. We couldn't. There was fog, which is normal in the Channel Islands, and so we broke off of the approach and we diverted to Jersey, the main island. And in Jersey, we were on the approach, and I was looking out of the window, and I saw the wheels come down. It was a high wing, so I saw the wheels come down, and I thought, well, that's weird. I don't see the ground. I'm sure it's there somewhere. And there was just cloud and cloud and cloud and cloud. And to my 9-year-old brain, what happened was kind of in this order was cloud, runway, land.
yeah,
And that absolutely captured me like nothing else, because I wanted to know How did those pilots see the runway? How did they know that the runway was there? How did they land with, from what I saw, a second out of the fog, and we're on the runway? And all of these questions started to go through my mind, and that's what started the journey. I wanted to get to the pilots to ask them, but unfortunately, my teacher grabbed me and took me backwards. There was an air stair at the back of this airplane, and so I ended up going to the back. So I never got to see the pilots, um, which really annoyed me. We eventually did get to Guernsey. We had a trip. I don't remember anything about the trip. The trip was second to all of this because I had so many things going through my mind. And then when I got back home, that's when I just began to study aviation. I wanted to understand it. I would go to the library. I would go, and I eventually joined the Air Cadets, the junior Royal Air Force. At the time, it was called the Air Training Corps, and that's what then got me deep into aviation and got me airborne. It got me into onto my first flight in a de Havilland Chipmunk. So that was
Okay.
cool.
Okay. And it's like, so like just as a like because we were talking about how you were like a ferry pilot, and so like after every pilot, like they get their CPL and they're like, okay, now like what do I do to get to my ATPL? Like that's a challenge every pilot has. And then I think like the majority of them, like they become flight instructors to get to that 1500-hour mark. But you kind of like made a unique choice to like become a ferry pilot. Was this like to build the hours you needed for the ATP, or was it like just something which kind of like fascinated you about the job? Yeah.
Well, the truth is, I never considered ferry flying ever.
Okay.
I didn't. It was not on my radar.
Okay.
The truth is from when I got really deep into aviation, I knew I wanted to be a pilot. I didn't care what I flew, honestly. The
Okay.
airlines would have been one of several options for me. In fact, the first option, because I came from a background where, we had no money as a family. We didn't have any money in the family. So it wasn't like, as much as my parents would have loved to, they couldn't say, okay, here's some money, go learn to fly. It didn't work like that. So I had some choices to try and achieve this goal of flying professionally. My choices were really either go get a job and pay for your flying lessons, or get a scholarship at an airline, of which at that time there was only really British Airways
Yeah.
were offering that scholarship. And then you have to be sort of, one of 10,000 applicants to get through. So the odds were slim. Um, or you join the Royal Air Force. And I thought, well, I'll go for join the Royal Air Force. And unfortunately, trying to join the Royal Air Force to be a pilot, that's when the Royal Air Force highlighted something that I already knew, which was that my eyesight wasn't perfect. It
Okay.
wasn't 20/20 vision, and so that meant that I couldn't join the Royal Air Force as a pilot. And they said, you can join the Royal Air Force, but just not in a flying capacity. And I thought, well, no, I didn't. Joining the Royal Air Force was only to fly. So then I thought, well, I've got to go the civilian route. And so, how do I do that? How do I do this? And so I got a job, and I worked hard, and I basically spent every penny I could uh, building my hours, getting my licenses, building my hours in the UK. Now, as part of that, I came to the US, and this was something that, again, that wasn't planned. This is one of those strange things you look back on and think, if that hadn't have happened, none of this would have happened.
Yeah.
But I didn't
Yeah.
plan it. What happened was is that money was tight, but I really wanted to push on and get my pilot's licenses. And if I came to America and flew in America at that time, because of the exchange rate, between the pound and the dollar, I was basically getting every 2 hours for one. So for
Mm.
every pound, I get $2 back. Plus, the weather was really good here, and obviously in the UK it can be inconsistent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's some days where you're not flying,
Mm.
and at that time as well, I had come across a friend who worked for Virgin Atlantic and said, "Would you like to have my buddy passes? Nobody seems to be using them. Would you like them?" So all of a sudden, this opportunity opened up to take this hard-earned money that I was building and come to America and do a solid 3 weeks. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to do multi-engine time, night time, instrument time, anything that was valuable in my logbook to try and just improve my logbook and the hours that I had in there, and to also get a really cool experience. And this is the weird thing, because the internet was brand new back then,
Mm.
barely just finding its feet, and I couldn't afford the phone call
Okay.
to any flight schools in America because they were exorbitant to pick up the phone and call America. However, with this newfangled internet thing,
Yeah.
I could chat with these flight schools, the ones that had signed up to the internet, uh, easily, and it wouldn't cost me anything because I could go to the library and use their computer. And so I found a flight school in San Diego that still exists, San Diego Flight Training International, sdfti.com. Don't know why I remember that, but I do.
Yeah.
And I said I'd like to come out and do as much as I can in 3 weeks. And uh, and so I came out, and what their or suggestion is why not convert your UK licenses to
Yeah.
FAA licenses for no reason other than it will be more interesting than flying around and around in circles just building time. Or you could go on a big cross country around America. And I was conscious that I wanted to be back ready for the flight home, because I had to go back to work. And I only had this 3 week block. And I said, well, let's go down the path of a conversion, commercial multi-instrument commercial multi-instrument conversion, and uh, and let's see how far we get, just for fun, and also for me. Then it's learning a new system. It's learning the American system, the radio phraseology, the airspace rules, the maps, the charts. So it made it way more interesting. And at the end of this 3 weeks, I had a FAA commercial multi-instrument. And I thought, well, okay, that's cool. I'm never going to use this, but it was very cool to do. Now I should get back to my job. And my job at the time was working for a convenience store chain, basically working internal security and things like that. And there just came that day where I had the offer to go and work for an Irish carrier, and I thought, okay, well, this is it. I'm going to leave my job, so my income goes away temporarily. But I left the job and I went over to Ireland. And at that time, there was no JAA. There was no harmonization of the licensing authorities throughout Europe. Each country had their own system, their own licensing, and their own rules and regulations. And so, because I held a UK pilot's license, to work commercially for the Irish carrier, I needed to go to Ireland, convert my UK license to an Irish license. It's very silly, isn't
Yeah.
it? Convert my license to an Irish license, and then start work. And so I went over to a small airfield outside of Dublin called Weston, and I began the conversion in a little 172, and then I went down to Dublin to get my Irish medical, which should have been just a paper exercise, and obviously an examination and a paper exercise. And this is where I ran into the problem.
Yeah.
The problem was that the medical side of JAA, this new idea to harmonize all of the European aviation authorities, the first thing that the JAA harmonized was the medical side, because it was easy. So medical standards from whatever date this was, everybody in Europe that signed up to JAA, every country had the same medical requirements. I happened to walk in to get my Irish medical at just about the same time as these new procedures were being adopted. And those new procedures had no provision, there was nothing in there, no provision for somebody that had had laser surgery. And
Oh,
I had
oh,
laser surgery on my eyes as a result of realizing that my eyesight was bad, and that restricted me from the RAF.
okay.
So I had laser surgery several years before. So I went to my Irish medical, and these guys said, "Well, you meet and exceed all of our parameters. However, we cannot issue you with a medical because you had laser surgery, and that's the only way that you can now meet our eyesight standards." Which didn't make too much sense to me,
Yeah.
because I could meet the standard. I didn't understand why, because you could put contact lenses in legally, you could wear glasses legally, but for some reason at that time you couldn't have had laser surgery to correct your eyes and then meet the standards. Um, and so, actually, to be fair, the Irish medical people were very, very supportive, and they almost needed somebody to be a test case, to try and start to change these rules. That happened to be me. But for me, of course, what that meant is I had nothing. I'd left my job. My job with the convenience store. So I've left my money source. I had now no way of earning money from working in the Irish carrier. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I need to be able to work. Um, aha, I have this FAA commercial pilot's license that is a current and valid pilot's license. The FAA were very happy with stabilized LASIK surgery. And so this was a valid way for me to work. Unfortunately, I was living in Europe. And of course, there's not that many FAA registered airplanes in Europe, but I went and found them. I went and found as many of these airplanes as I could. And that ultimately led me to people like Cessna and Cirrus. Cirrus were brand new back then, brand new company, but they had started to begin to sell within Europe. And these airplanes were imported from America, Cessna, Pipers, Cirruses, imported from America, and they retained their N register, their FAA register, until they were sold to whichever country in Europe, and then they were re-registered. But for that period of demonstration and delivery to new customers, they remained on the N register. I'm your pilot, so I
Yeah.
can now fly. So that's what I did. I did freelance commercial work while I tried to fix this medical issue with the European system. And so I went and found all of these N-registered aeroplanes. And of course, what then happened, this is how the ferry pilot thing happened, is that I would deliver to these people, these new owners of these Cessnas and Cirruses and Pipers throughout Europe. And I became a reliable delivery pilot. And then, of course, I was asked, "Oh, we've been let down by our ferry pilot. Could you please go to America and pick up an airplane and bring it here?" This is just now a source of work. This is how I'm making my living while I wait for my flying medical in Europe to be sorted out. So I accidentally became a ferry pilot. Uh,
Okay.
but I tried to do a good job, and I built a business. I became self-employed, and I built a business. And eventually, I was enjoying ferry flying and busy enough that when my Irish medical, and well, actually I should say JAA medical, was then approved, which took 3 to 4 years actually. It was quite a process, but when it was approved, I didn't need it because I was already ferrying and I was enjoying discovering the world and enjoying flying these different airplanes. So that's a long answer, but basically it was an accident. It was a pure accident because of bureaucracy and a change in the European regulations. That's what led to it.
Like what year was this in? Like when all this was like kind of happening?
That was the late 90s.
Okay,
So yeah, late 90s. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And like just out of curiosity, like, now the license conversion process has become like a little bit easier with like the introduction of digital portals and all that. But back then, I'm just assuming like there must have been like a stack of paperwork to get everything done.
That's exactly it. I actually went to the head of the IAA, the Irish Aviation Authority, who was I don't remember his name at the moment, but he's probably long retired, but he was a
Mm,
very, very supportive guy. He
mm,
didn't see the sense in this, but what he said to me, this is how he demonstrated it to me. He said he got this big book, and he said, these are the old Irish regulations. There are millions of words in here that I can interpret and make a sound decision on somebody's fitness to fly and medical status. Lots of words. Here is the new JAA medical procedures. It's a tiny little book that has very few words in it, and unfortunately, if your specific condition isn't listed here, the process is to try and put those words into this book, but they don't exist at the moment. There's nothing I can do, and that was the problem. And so the process itself, I was a relatively willing volunteer. I went to the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK. I went to their medical facility several times, and they had many, many examiners looking in my eyes. I had lots of eye surgeons um, answering different questions on my behalf. Not that I employed them; it was just, these were just people that were employed for the process of changing these regulations. I became just the guinea pig, and so I had things shot in my eye and all of this sort of stuff. The crux of this was that there was a feeling amongst some of the medical people that uh, if you had had laser surgery and then you experienced a rapid decompression, that the flap that was cut to do the surgery would then somehow fly open. And of course, many many doctors and eye surgeons and other people would say, well, no, that's almost like saying if you cut your hand and then you're healed, that when you depressurize that your hand would open up, all of your cuts from your history of your life would open up, and that's not true. It's not how it works. And so it was obvious to me that this was a regulation that was going to change, but in a bureaucratic regulation system, these things just take time. And so for me, I didn't have time because I had walked away from my relatively well-paid job and I'd lost my income source. So I just needed to carry on. And if I was going to work, I had a choice. I could go just to any job and walk into a grocery store or a warehouse or whatever. But I had already got it in my head that I'm a professional pilot now, so I need to fly however I need to fly. I'll just make it work. And so it was a very interesting process, but not it wasn't none of this was planned. It
yeah.
just sort of happened. Bizarre.
Yeah. And it's like when you were a ferry pilot, was there like one particular airplane which was like the most commonly delivered, or which was like the most popular, or?
Yeah, for me personally, it was the Cirrus. This was this was right around when Cirrus started. I can remember going to Duluth, where Cirrus is based in Minnesota, and they had just one tiny little hangar, and and they were making this really cool airplane. It had sort of just started to gain popularity, and then of course exponentially it just rocketed. That people wanted to buy this airplane, and that was the SR-20, and the trouble is when people overseas wanted to buy this, the Cirrus is a lot of it is large composite pieces. And so traditionally, if you let's say you wanted to ship a Cessna 172 from the US to Ireland, you would take the wings off, you take the engine off, you pack it all into a box, you put it on a container ship, and you'd ship it across to Ireland. And when it got to Ireland, you would have somebody put the wings back on, put the engine back on, test fly it, and that's that. With the Cirrus, because of these large composite pieces, it was very hard, if not impossible, to get them into a shipping container. So there was only really one way to ship these, which was using ferry pilots. And through some very bizarre accidents, again, meeting certain people in certain fields, I ended up being asked if I could demonstrate some Cirruses in the UK. And from that, I was also then asked if I could help with a ferry flight. And that led me to Cirrus, where I met 2 or 3 other ferry pilots. And because, again, it was such a small group, and this was so early on in Cirrus's development, that this small group became the Cirrus ferry pilots. And of course, when people really started to buy these things, we were saturated. We had a lot of these airplanes to fly. So my very good friend Joe Thorne, he was living in Duluth. He was sort of the main guy. He was the main ferry pilot in the early days, working for the Klapmeyer brothers. And so Joe became a very good friend of mine, and actually he was in my wedding party when we got married. But we became very, very good friends, and we just would go backwards and forwards, picking up these Cirruses, taking them to Europe or Africa or wherever they were going, coming back, getting another one, taking that, coming back, getting another one, take that. And so over the years, the Cirrus was by far the aircraft that I ferried the most. And of course the SR-22 came along, and they really started to sell. Now, eventually they found a factory in Europe. I believe it's in the Isle of Wight in Bembridge. I think that's right. I'm not 100% sure. But they would then start to produce the airplane there, which solved this container problem. So they would manufacture, or at least put the airplanes together, I think, in Bembridge. I believe that's correct. And so, but honestly, the demand was still going up and up and up. And so we were as busy as ever. And actually more and more ferry pilots came on and became friends. And so we were always very busy with the Cirruses. Yeah, they're great airplanes.
And you kind of talked about how these ferry pilots, they became very close to you as friends and so forth. And on your blog, you have just kind of stated it's just something you would maybe not recommend to other people. And you just briefly say unfortunately you lost some of your friends. Could you just maybe talk about why is that? Why would you not recommend others to become ferry pilots?
Well, mainly because there's
Yeah.
much easier and safer ways to become an airline pilot or a professional pilot. I shouldn't say airline, professional pilot. Much easier ways. My way was not the easy way or the safest way. As you said, we were the old myth about ferry pilots is that, and it may exist today, I'm not sure, is, well, this is a way for low time, inexperienced pilots to build hours. That was the myth. It's so far from the truth. You won't survive if you're a low time, inexperienced pilot flying at all times of the year across the Atlantic or the Pacific. This requires a degree of experience. And yes, it can be very dangerous. You have to be able to understand weather patterns and make good decisions for yourself and for the airplane. Um, and so the truth is that many of these ferry pilots, certainly the ones that I came into contact with, were very, very experienced pilots, who had found their way into ferry flying with their own version or their own stories of getting into ferry flying, but it had grabbed them. They like to work on their own. They like to travel. They like to go into different countries and see cultures, and or for whatever reason it happened to be for them that they stayed with it. You also have to remember that the insurance companies were very reluctant to insure anybody that was low time or low experience, because of the risk. And so that excluded many low time pilots from being able to ferry fly. Um, and so yeah, I lost a lot of colleagues and friends, and some of them hit harder than others. And eventually, of course, what happens is you're very confident in your abilities, but then you start thinking, well, so was that person. Very, very, very had very, very good pilot skills, very experienced, very confident, and this went wrong or that went wrong, and now they're not here anymore. And so you start to realize, well, this could happen to me. This is something that could happen. This is not These airplanes are not really designed to be flown across the oceans. That's not what they're designed to do. So what we do is we try and mitigate risk. We try and thoroughly plan. We try and understand weather patterns. We make sure that people understand this is not a rush. There's no I'm going to deliver on this date. It's we'll make decisions based on weather patterns, and you try everything you can to be as safe as you possibly can. But invariably, once you get in that airplane and you go, especially at times of the year, in the northern hemisphere in the wintertime, across the Atlantic, that's a difficult place to be. It's not for somebody that has, for going on their first time across the Atlantic. You would be very lucky if you didn't have an issue. And of course, remember as well, this is before the time of there were very there weren't any bit things like ForeFlight or Sky Demon or things like that. They didn't exist. Live weather didn't exist. Live radars, live weather patterns, those things didn't exist. Generally, when we would leave Labrador or Newfoundland to head across the Atlantic, we would have a faxed piece of paper or just somebody that had drawn on what they thought was going on across. A meteorologist would draw what was going on across the Atlantic, but this was hours and hours old by the time you got to the middle of the Atlantic in something like a Cirrus or a Cessna or a Piper.
Yeah.
That's maybe 6 or 7 hours later. And so you've then got to try and assimilate what's on that piece of paper to how the movement of those weather patterns may have changed to what you see outside and what the airplane is reacting to with as far as winds and things like that. And so the job itself, it was 50% fascinating and 50% terrifying. It's not a job that I think anybody thinking, okay, I think I'm going to be a pilot. What should I think? Oh, I know, I'll be a ferry pilot. That's not the job that anybody really would go for. It seems that most ferry pilots have found their way into ferry flying and just it works for them. And it's something that they can do and they enjoy doing. But I wouldn't say that was something that would be on the career path
Yeah.
for most professional pilots. So that's why I said I wouldn't recommend that anyone would think, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a ferry pilot, and then I'll be an airline pilot, and then everything's great. I would say go for the more structured, safer approach of go to college and then get your certificates, your flight instructor certificates, instruct for a bit, go to a regional, go to an airline. Ta-da!
Yeah.
Much easier.
Okay. Yeah. But like, has the FAA or like the CAA or whatever, have they introduced like more regulations or like rules for ferry pilots, or is it like kind of because it seems um like one of the more like quote unquote dangerous jobs a pilot can have. Is there like aerobatics pilots have their own set of rules which they have to follow? So like, do ferry pilots have any rules as such, or?
Well, I mean, every flight that crosses the ocean, you have a set of regulations. It's not specific to ferry pilots.
Yeah.
You have you have your commercial pilot regulations, and so you have to try and follow those. Now, the fact that you don't have passengers, and in the US it'll be a Part 91
Yeah.
operation, so a private operation. That means that a whole bunch of regulations don't apply to you because you don't have passengers on board, you don't have cargo on board, anything like that. It's basically just you. Um, but there are regulations. You've got your commercial pilot regulations, of course, as far as flight time, rest, and things like that. The aircraft itself, when you put a ferry tank in the back seat, or wherever you put the ferry tank, it has to be approved and signed off by the FAA. You have to demonstrate new weight and balance, performance, and things like that. And then to go across the Atlantic, let's say if you're going across the Atlantic, you've got requirements for certain survival equipment. And HF radio. There's a lot of regulations to try as much as possible to make it as safe as possible. The FAA are sometimes they're frustrated, but honestly, the FAA are very good at allowing you to do something, but they expect that you're going to follow the regulations enough that you're going to be as safe as you possibly can be. It helps that you don't have passengers on board. If this was a commercial operation with passengers on board, I don't know who would take that ticket. Hey,
Yes.
let's go buy a ticket on a Cirrus to go across the Atlantic in the wintertime. I don't know who would want to do that, but let's say you did that. All of a sudden, there's going to be way, way more regulations because the FAA is trying to protect that person from me. If it's only me on board, then hopefully I'm following all of their rules and regulations to make this as safe as you possibly can. Now, the friends and colleagues that I've had that didn't make it. Many of those things were just circumstance. Bad luck, you could say, but some mechanical problems. And if you have those kind of issues over, let's say, the US, you have 1,000 airports you can go to. You have
Yeah.
people to talk to. You have people that can come and find you. We still have fatalities every day, in the general aviation world, but it's still insanely safe because people generally follow the regulations. But you still have incidents when you're halfway across the Atlantic. You just don't have many options, and so if you have that same issue that a pilot may have over the US, the outcome is going to be different. And as a ferry pilot, once you get into this, you have to have a conversation with yourself, and you have to be comfortable that you have to be comfortable that if something goes wrong, you don't have many options, and so you just prepare for them as best as you can. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think you like kind of talked about this in another podcast as well, and many other like on YouTube I've been like watching a few videos about other ferry pilots as well, and everybody talks about like the suit that you guys wear. And it seems like to have played a very critical role in terms of like keeping you safe. Um like how like in general, like how effective is it? Like in terms of like let's say you would unexpectedly, let's say you might end up in like a cold body of water. Would it like keep you warm or would it keep you safe from that? Or
Well,
yeah.
I'll answer it this way.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
So here's the suit and that's why it became the part of the title of the book was rubber
Yeah.
suit and
Yeah.
lukewarm suit. So the rubber suits bit is the immersion suit. My suit was a Transport Canada survival suit, and was ridiculously expensive when I bought it. I wondered why I was buying this, but I thought I probably should. And the truth is that, uh, well, let me say this: to test it, Joe and myself put them on and jumped into Lake Superior just around wintertime to see how effective it was, and it's pretty effective. It was pretty good, but we didn't stay there for too long.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back to reality. If you let's pretend we're in a Cessna. We're in a Cessna 172 and we're going across the Atlantic in the wintertime. It's nighttime. Um, okay, the engine quits. There's only one place to go. The nice thing is that there's no mountains, so you know you're not going to hit anything before you hit the ocean. So that's you've got some time now. Generally, we would go across at, depending on the winds, 8 to 12,000. And so you've got a little bit of time to try and get the engine started again. Try and get a call out on HF to make sure you can give an approximate latitude, longitude for people to come find you. If you go in, number one, you've got to survive the crash. But let's pretend that we've survived the crash, and that's great. Um, Now the most important thing is that your immersion suit has to be on and zipped, ready to
Yeah.
go. We found this out. I struggle to remember the gentleman's name, but there was a ferry pilot that took off out of Newfoundland, and he was within maybe an hour of departure. So he was just starting his flight across the Atlantic, and he had some issue. He was still in VHF communication, so he was able to get a message to the authorities to say, "Hey, I've got an engine problem. I'm going to ditch. If you guys could come and get me, that would be great." And he had an immersion suit on, but it was not zipped up. He had just put it on and he had not zipped it. Well, he survived the crash. He was able to exit the airplane, but the cold water went inside of the suit. And before they could come and get him, he he had hypothermia. He died from the cold, from the cold going into the suit. So there, what we realized then, because I used to do that as well, because it's quite an uncomfortable, bulky suit. It gets very warm in the airplane. I just used to generally put it on, but I wouldn't zip it up or anything like that. Well, after that accident, I think all of us then decided, okay, right, we've got to basically have this ready. Maybe I'll have a little bit of a zip there that I can just pull it up if I need to use it. Um, but so you've got to survive the crash. You've got to have a zipped up, ready to go immersion suit. You have to be able to exit the airplane. And then at that point, let's say that we're in the middle of the Atlantic. Well, now the if you had a raft in the wintertime, a raft that you would buy from Sporties or Transair or somewhere like that would be inadequate at the very least, if you could even get into it in the swells of the Atlantic during the wintertime. So your best hope is that your immersion suit will, number one, keep you afloat, and it will keep you dry enough that you don't suffer so much of the ill effects of the cold in time for a C-130 or something to come find you and drop a raft that is suitable for the Atlantic. It's the size of it would not fit in a Cessna 172. But some kind of a good survival raft, or a ship that could then come and pick you up, or whatever would be coordinated after that. The immersion suit's job is to keep you alive, and keep you afloat long enough that somebody can come and rescue you.
Okay.
And so the investment in the immersion suit was a good one, even though I didn't ever need to use it, which was nice. Um, but there were also, in the early days, there were ferry pilots that had an immersion suit, but it was on the back seat. And then when things start to happen, there's absolutely no time or no room, in fact, to put this immersion suit on. There's no point putting it on in the water because you're putting the water in the suit, which is it defeats the object. So I think that after that crash of that ferry pilot off of Newfoundland, everybody sort of realized the immersion suit has to be a good one, and you have to wear it, and it needs to be ready to be worn, and that's your best chance of survival in a single engine airplane if you ditch in the Atlantic, certainly in the wintertime, for sure.
But like sometimes like in airplanes, like when the safety presentations are going on, like in the life jackets, sometimes they say like there are like tracking beacons on them. There might be lights on them. So, would these suits also have like tracking beacons on them or like lights, or is that something that wasn't there around that time?
They weren't on them back then, but we did have portable portable devices that we carried in the airplane. So you can attach those to the suit. So very similar, but the suits themselves didn't have those. Now, of course, in the airliners, you have big rafts. You have massive rafts that are able to survive the oceans. And so, in that case, the life jacket is purely for the person that slips or doesn't get into the raft or is getting to the raft. Its purpose is for a short amount of time, hopefully, before you can have the person get into the raft. And that's sort of the same as the immersion suit. It just has to last a lot longer. And so that's why you have to be fully covered. It has to be fully sealed, and it has to be a good quality to be able to survive for long enough if you do ditch.
Yeah. And so like I believe like as a ferry pilot, like your safety in the air is extremely important, but I'm sure like even on the ground there are like certain safety considerations you have to make, like especially in northern locations in Canada, especially like the taxiways or the runways can get very slippery. So like how did this affect like especially in a small airplane like a Cirrus or how did this affect like the performance of the aircraft or just like safety in general?
Well, I mean that's the thing is just because you're working as a ferry pilot, doesn't change the rules of physics. You still have to do your performance. The good thing is that most of these airports that we would land at, especially, and now I'm thinking Northern Atlantic, going across the Northern Atlantic. Those airfields were most of them were used during wartime, during World War II, to ferry from the US across to Europe and back again, to help the war effort during World War II. And so these runways are wide and long. And so that really helps because, yes, you're right. You can get very slippery, contaminated runways. And in something like a Piper or a Cessna or a Cirrus, you could slip around for sure. Um, and so yeah, we'd still obviously have to do a performance calculation, but invariably these runways were long and wide, and especially if it's cold, then you increase the performance of the airplane somewhat as well. You certainly don't deteriorate from the performance as long as, and this is especially in the Cirrus with the clean wing, to make sure you have a clean wing with no contaminants, and so for sure, the cold made a difference. The other thing is, of course, is that the oil starts to thicken and freeze if you leave the airplane outside, and generally you would. And so when we shut down, we would then have to have a portable heater, this sort of big cart with a diesel engine and it would have these big hoses that would plug into the air intakes of the little airplane, and it would keep the engine bay warm, which is really what we're trying to do, is keep the oil warm. Um, and so that helped, so that we could start easily, and the oil was of the proper viscosity to be able to start the engine. The problem I did find, which was one I didn't expect, was that especially in the wintertime in northeastern Canada, Labrador, those kind of places, and out into Greenland, was that the early versions of the PFD aircraft, the LCD crystals would freeze. And so if it was -40 or -45 outside or overnight, and then you turn on your equipment, well, there was nothing there because the LCD crystals are frozen, and it just took time for those to heat and then work. And they would work eventually, but a lot of times you're trying your best to try and keep things warm inside, so the engine would start, and then you'd put your heaters on and try and warm the cockpit enough that that the LCD screens would then unfreeze themselves as well. So those were some of the considerations of the ground. But I do remember taxiing in Keflavik. It was either Keflavik or Reykjavik in Iceland.
Yeah.
I think in a Cirrus, and it was nighttime, and I just landed, and I had the drifting snow coming completely 90 degrees across the runway, and it was so disorientating because you got that sense of sideways movement, and I can remember I had to stop and sort of reset myself and look through the drifting snow, and try as much as I could to follow the taxiway to the ramp area. That was something. Yeah, I don't know why that just popped into my head, but that was something that was unnerving. That was a very strange sensation.
Okay.
So those sort of things, sure, those existed, but they weren't really a problem. Most of these places, the places we stopped at, were set up for these kind of flights, and so they had the equipment and they had the expertise, and so that wasn't so much of a big deal.
Okay. But like, would you maybe consider like the ferry pilot job has kind of like better prepared you for like the jobs you had afterwards, or um would you still maybe consider an alternate route, like looking at it back in hindsight?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I got to be honest.
Yeah.
Uh, I wouldn't change anything that I've done, because when I was at school, I realized after my flight when I was 9 years old, I realized that I wanted to be a pilot. I was so single-minded that the subjects at school, anything that didn't have any something to do with my future aviation career, as I saw it, I was awful at. I didn't even try. Science, math, those kind of things, I was good at because I knew that that was going to help me with my flying career. But other things, other subjects, I just wasn't into. I just didn't bother. I thought it was a waste of my brain space. And so my education, I left school with enough of an education to understand the sciences and things that we're talking about right now, but I didn't understand the world. And the ferry pilot job, again, this is a pure accident. What it allowed me to do was to go to so many parts of the world that I never would have had a chance to go to, and go and see what happened in that part of the world. Go meet people. Go watch how people conduct themselves on a daily basis. Understand cultures. Go to different religious temples and things like this, and try and understand for myself and make up that piece of my education that I either didn't get or I didn't pay attention to. And so I really got an opportunity to explore the world. and have an appreciation for other cultures and other countries, which for me I think was very, very healthy. So I wouldn't change it for that at all. The chance to fly many, many different types of airplanes is also something that I at the time it was just a job, the next job, the next job, the next job. But now that I can look back, I just think, wow, I got to fly these airplanes that were so cool, and so I wouldn't ever change that either. I still wouldn't recommend it, you know. But I
Yeah.
mean, for me, it was definitely it was really a valuable and healthy thing for me to do, and I enjoyed it. I really did. I enjoyed being able to go somewhere that perhaps you shouldn't be. Let's say that. Somewhere that is unstable. Some of the Western Africa countries that are a little unstable, and so you have to be quiet. You have to move around and not be this loud and brash or anything like that, and just sort of associate with people and just do your thing and keep out of people's way, but just observe and just watch. And for me, that was fascinating. Just to see, I'm in this country. What happens in this country? What are the people like? What do they do every day? What it turned out to be is that it seemed that wherever you go in the world, whether it's a war zone or a peaceful place or a poor place or a rich place, everybody's just trying to go out and feed their family, feed themselves, and try and make the most of their life that they've been given. And that came from ferry flying. That's just for me, but it's something that I took away from the ferry flying that I think is so valuable, and something I never ever would have got from my school education, from reading books. I actually got to experience it. So looking back on it, it's really, really cool.
Yeah. And so I just had like one last question about your ferry flying career. So like when I was reading your book, like one of your like no most notable trips was like from the trip which you took from Minnesota to South Africa in like the Cirrus SR-22. So that was just like mind-boggling in a certain sense because it's like I was just trying to imagine the number of stops you might
Mm.
have had to take from Minnesota, South Africa to South Africa, and then you were also like talking about the like some of the weather conditions you encountered on your way to South Africa. Like could you please like just maybe briefly talk about that? Like what kind of weather did you see, and
Yeah.
like how many stops were there? Like what'd you do in South Africa after that? Yeah.
Well, let's see. To try and answer the question, how many stops? I don't remember. We had really big ferry tanks. I think 110-gallon ferry tanks. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And it was two airplanes actually, two Cirruses, and they were going down to Lanseria in South Africa very early on. I think these were one of the first SR-22 models to go down there, and so these guys were very keen to get these airplanes. And in fact, the guy that owned the Cirrus dealership in South Africa came along, not in my airplane, in the other one, in the other SR-22 with the other ferry pilot Graham Tickton. And so let's see, stops. I'd have to think about that. I would say maybe 11 or 12. I'd have to look, but maybe 11 or 12. I know roughly from Duluth down to Newfoundland, and then out to the Azores, in the middle of the Atlantic there, and then across to Dakar, Senegal, down through Western Africa. I can't remember where we went. Gabon, and we would go down to Namibia, and then across to South Africa. So it was quite a journey. I mean, it's an amazing journey. And so yeah, it's as far as weather's concerned, of course, you start in cold winter weather. Then you go to temperate weather in the middle, and then to hot weather at the end. You had basically the whole range of temperatures. So to pack was quite a challenge. Now that's helped me with packing for my airline career. I
Yeah.
have to say, there you go. There's an experience I took.
Yeah.
But to pack for that kind of a trip is very difficult because you have to have cold weather equipment. Obviously, you have to have your survival equipment, and you have to have warm weather equipment and or warm weather clothing. And so to pack was difficult. But also, the first time, the story that I wrote in the book, um, I'm uh, I'm going to give you a bit of inside information here.
Mm.
Um, but that story is about three flights into one. Um, all of those things, I'd probably give up if all of those things happened on one flight. But to try and make it somewhat entertaining, you take pieces of certain flights and you put them into one story, and it makes it a little bit more easy to read and interesting. Um, but actually getting to South Africa was fantastic. This was a time where apartheid had just it was there was change going on. Things were changing for the better in South Africa, but there was still a little tension. And it was the first time I'd been to South Africa, and I stayed with a friend down there from the dealership, from the Cirrus dealership. And so I thought, as I always do, and I've done this in many places of the world, I'm just going to go and explore. I'm not gonna highlight myself. I'm not gonna make myself stand out as much as I can, and I'm just going to go and explore and see what I can see and see what's going on today. And so I did that, and I came across this barber shop, and I thought, fantastic! I'll get my hair cut. And there was a bit of a language barrier. I could, but if you go into a barber shop, it's easy to make chop 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 chop. You can communicate this way. And the ladies were very nice, and at first they were a little quiet, but then they were giggly, and I got my hair cut and I came out and I explored around, and then I went back to the house in the evening, and um, the guy that I was staying with said, "What did you do today?" And I told him, and he said, "Where did you go? Where did you get that haircut?" And he said, "You can't go there. That's not somewhere for you to go. You could have been killed." And for a haircut.
Yeah.
And I guess it was still that time where things were changing, and but the truth is that I came in for a haircut. There was no threat that I was offering, and these guys took no threat, and they cut my hair. I left them a nice tip, and they did a nice job with my haircut. And that's what I like is just to go find normal people. I don't like the extreme things. I don't like the headlines never represent a country.
Mm.
That's something that's definitely I've taken away from the ferry flying. The things you read about in a country that doesn't represent the people of the country generally. You go seek out normal, regular people, and people are just people. They're nice, and and uh, and so yeah, that was it was fairly interesting, but it was lovely to go down and see some of these countries, and the good and the bad. I wasn't overwhelmed with Gabon. I thought that was a country that needed some improvement. But then, the next stop would be Namibia. And Namibia was a wonderful country, very well run, and people were just lovely. And it's crazy in this little airplane, with these four seats, that you can travel and see these things and see such contrasts, of different countries as you travel down, let's say, Western Africa. But from the air, of course, you don't see the borders. You don't see anything. You're just flying. But as soon as you land, you can be in these completely different cultures within 9 or 10 hours flight in a Cirrus, let's say. Um, and it's amazing, really. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Okay. And so I kind of wanted to talk about now just like your time on the 737 Max. And so this is like the aircraft you kind of now fly on a daily basis. And like how's your experience been like flying this airplane, and like what's your like favorite feature or aspect of it?
Well, so I should say I don't only fly the Max. I fly
Okay.
the 700 NG, 800
Okay.
NG, 900
Okay.
NG, and the Max as well.
Okay.
Um, it seems that I fly the Max a lot, actually. That's probably the
Mm.
one I fly the most because I
Mm.
fly a lot of the Hawaii flights. I guess I just can't get away from these oceanic
Mm.
crossings, but I fly that the most, and so I invariably fly the Max a lot. Um, the uh, I mean, generally speaking, the 737 is an amazing airplane. It's a wonderful airplane. It's older technology. There's no two ways about that. It's a product of the 60s. But that means it's tried and tested, and it's very much a pilot's airplane. It's nice to fly. The cockpit leaves a lot to be desired. I should say flight deck. The flight deck is a lot leaves a lot to be desired. Um, it's uh, it's not very well ergonomically designed. It wasn't designed for these long flights that we do now, the 6 and 7 hour flights. It was designed to do 1 to 2 hour flights. Um, and so that still leaves a little bit to be desired. Um, the NG is a really lovely airplane to fly, the next generation aircraft. The the Max is actually the sweetest of all of them to fly. It feels very stable. It's very harmonized to fly. It's got good power from the engines. It's a really, really good airplane. I like it a lot. I like to fly it a lot. And it, yeah, obviously it's had its issues,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I'm sure you want to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not an aerospace engineer. I'm the guy that flies it. I
Mm.
rely and trust on the people that design and build the airplane, that they do their job. My
Mm.
job is to fly it. Within our parameters, so that we safely move people from one place to the other. Um, but yeah, the Max itself it's a good airplane. I like it a lot. If I see that I'm going to be flying a Max, I enjoy that.
Mm.
It's a good airplane. Okay, now talk about the bad things.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's what I've just kind of heard. Like most pilots who do fly the Max, they're like they say, it's just it is a very safe airplane to fly for sure. But it just it has been under a lot of scrutiny. But is it do you just think maybe it's just like the media is kind of highlighting just the issues it has? Like it's just a quote unquote unlucky airplane as opposed to the others, or
Well, no. I mean, there have been serious issues with it, and and rightly so. The media have focused on it, I think. And this is just my opinion. I cannot talk for my airline or anything else, because that's not my job. But I can give you my personal opinion. And the media have rightly focused on this because there have been some very serious, and tragic
Mm.
issues with this. Um, Now, has there been a lot of has there been a lot of fact checking? No. Has there been a lot of sensationalizing this? Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great thing for a news cycle to talk about. Yes, it is. But the truth is that uh, they should be highlighting this because it has tragically involved many families with these, especially the early accidents. And so, rightly so, the manufacturers needed to get in and fix this.
Yeah.
I'm glad that the regulators all kind of agreed, and that this was fixed and put right before the airplane was put back into the air. Um, and so I think um, as a result of that, you wonder whether people would want to fly on the Max again. And I did wonder that, to be honest. I'm somebody, knowing from the inside and how the systems work, I was very comfortable that this was a safe airplane. It was nice to be armed with the knowledge that, that we know how to deal with that same situation. Our industry is built on learning. We're always learning. We incidents happen, and if we do nothing about it, then we're failing ourselves and everybody that we fly. But if we learn from it, then we're continuing to improve, and that's all we can do. And so that has to be the emphasis. And so for me, I was very comfortable that, I understood the incidents that happened early on, and I was comfortable that how to deal with those incidents. We all went through additional training to make sure that we were comfortable with this, and we were given simulated time to recreate as many of these things as we needed to, which I think was a really good thing. And so, yeah, it's a real shame, because the airplane itself is a really nice airplane. It's nice to fly. It's very stable. It's very quiet for the passengers, and it's a good airplane. It's very efficient. The engines themselves, which I guess indirectly caused this problem. The fact that Boeing needed these engines because they were so good. Airbus didn't have the issue. I flew the Airbus before. I flew the Airbus with these new engines, with the LEAP engines, and they didn't have the ground clearance problem that the Boeing had. It was pure luck, maybe, but one that Airbus, I'm sure, was very happy about. So they didn't have this problem. Boeing had to really do a lot of thinking about how to solve this problem. Boeing is a good company. That these aerospace companies are producing a product. Embraer, Airbus, Boeing, all of these people are producing a product that has a lot of engineering put into them to solve problems. Boeing had to solve this problem quite quickly, because otherwise they would lose a massive amount of market share to Airbus. They had to have these engines. They're stupidly efficient, compared to the older technology, which again is where we're trying to improve. We're improving as an industry. But I guess as part of that, there were mistakes made. And those mistakes, with the right circumstances, led to these accidents. And for me, yes, you could, I can watch the news, but that doesn't tell me anything. I want to try and understand, and and really get to grips with what's going on with this airplane. And I'm comfortable with it. I understand when people are in the back of the airplane, that you relinquish control to somebody when you sit in the back of an airplane. I understand that. I really do. And so the only thing I can say is that the passengers that I fly, I want them to be comfortable, that we're comfortable flying. And that's where we've got to now. We've had tragic incidents, we've had unfortunate incidents, and anytime these days that you say the word Max, the media go crazy because now they've got things to talk about. It's another Max problem, and it's uncomfortable, but the truth is, and the reality is that it's a good airplane, and I like to fly it. I would imagine I will be flying one tomorrow, and it's
Yeah, like even in India here, many of the airlines are like going, they're like placing huge orders for the Max. Like even Air India is. There's another new airline called Acosta Air. They even want like they've made a lot of purchases of the Max. So yeah, it is. It's definitely becoming a very popular airplane here as well. So,
yeah, and it's because, well, it's a good airplane, and let's be honest, it's cheap.
yeah,
Compared to if you and I ran an airline and we looked at the what's on offer. We need some airplanes. We need to put about 150 to 200 people in to make this efficient, because we need to run our airline and make a profit. Otherwise, we'll be closed down. And so what are we going to buy? If you get a heavy jet, that's massively expensive. So a 737 or an Airbus is a great, a narrow body is a great option for us. The 321neo is expensive. It's the next, technology wise, it's more technologically advanced. And so you pay for that. Even small things like, it has 3 IRSs instead of 2. Do you need 3 IRSs? This one does. The other one doesn't. It's a difference in the philosophy of the two companies. The Airbus is fly by wire. That's technology that costs money, but that's Airbus's philosophy to produce their jets, and they I'm sure believe and stand behind this is what people want to fly on. That's meant that that Airbus have a massive backlog, I'd imagine, of orders. If we ordered one today, we probably wouldn't get it for a few years. How are we going to operate this? With the Max? Same thing. They're different philosophies. They're very much their ideal is that you've got pilots flying the airplane, and it's created around an airplane with added technology, the technology that we need to operate the airplane. So 2 FMSs, 2 IRs, and some backup systems. But basically, it's a simple airplane. Easy to maintain. It's not electronic boxes necessarily. It's more mechanical components, and so there's a philosophy that way. Not saying that either one is as better or as good as each other. It's just two philosophies. But what that does mean is that the Max is a little cheaper. So we might get it quicker. And I hate to say this, I would imagine that because of the negative press that has come from the issues with the Max, that the Max, Boeing needs to sell the Max. And so it's probably much cheaper. We can probably get discounts if we go and buy the Max now over joining a waiting list to buy some Airbuses. And so I think this is basically just, it's just economies at the moment. It's just the way it is at the moment. And so I'm not surprised that newcomers to the market, and even established carriers, like Air India, who need to replace their narrow body airplanes, it's probably financially it's a better decision to buy a whole bunch of Maxes over waiting for a whole bunch of Airbus Neos. That's just my impression. I have no idea about this. This is purely my speculation, but that's probably the truth. It's probably close to the truth.
And you just mentioned you've flown the Airbus as well, and many pilots they have this opinion that the Airbus is maybe easier to fly because you have the fly-by-wire system, and you've flown both. What's your stance on that?
Well, this is the $1 million question, isn't it? Okay. It's going to be a really boring answer because the truth is they're both really good airplanes, very equal. However, they have their pros and cons, and the pros and cons are way apart from each other. This is my opinion again. I flew about 10,000 hours in the Airbus, the 1920 and the 21 Neo. So I have a considerable amount of time in the Airbus. There are many things that when I fly the Boeing that you think, ooh, it would be good to fix that. It would be good. That would make it a little easier for us to operate this airplane. Simple things such as systems diagrams, some automatic controls. As an example, the start procedure on the Boeing is very much mechanical. You need electrics. You start to turn the engine fan itself. So you need air. So you have to turn a switch to put the air into the system to turn the turbine. And then at a certain rotation speed, you have to put fuel in, and then monitor that and make sure that all of the parameters are good. And then at a certain time, check that the starter disengages. But with the Airbus, you select on or off, and all of that stuff that I just explained is done automatically. Now, is one better than the other? One's easier than the other. Is it better? I don't know. It's easier maybe to make a mistake if you have too many steps to achieve something, and I think maybe that's what Airbus philosophy was. And remember, in this philosophy, where the Boeing philosophy was the 60s, the Airbus philosophy was the 80s. So only 20 years different, and now we're 30 years on, and so it's still old technology, but it's just newer. It's just trying to learn from some of the things that the Boeing pilots, I would imagine, just said exactly what I just said. Now that we've got these longer journeys, and the range is increasing, this is an uncomfortable cockpit. Why can't we improve the how comfortable this flight deck is? Airbus took that, and they made it way more ergonomically. They improved the ergonomics of the I can't say call it flight deck massively, and made it more comfortable, which meant it was less fatiguing, for the longer journeys. Something that Boeing, their design was already, it was there. That everybody was learning from that design, and so. So that's basically it. Now, to fly them, the Boeing by far is nicer to fly, because you go back to your pilot skills. You're flying it. You can feel it. If you have a strong crosswind, you feel everything, and you can react to it in the same way that you would in a Cessna. You're reacting to it, and you feel very connected to the airplane. But the truth is, I generally fly to 10,000 feet, and I generally fly the approach maybe on most days when it's not low cloud bases. I'll maybe fly from 10,000 feet down. So as a percentage of a flight, you're not really flying for that much. It's just the first bit and the last bit. And so to bearing that in mind, of course. Now, on the Airbus side, it's not as nice to fly. You don't feel as connected. However, you have to learn how to operate this airplane and make it do what you want it to do with the side stick. And let's say, same scenario, landing on a strong crosswind, it takes an amount of skill and pilot skill. It's a pilot skill that you have to learn in the Airbus, as opposed to in the Boeing. It's something that you've been taught from day one, how to control and how to manipulate this airplane using conventional controls. Once you figure out the Airbus, it's a very, very, very nice airplane to fly. And you become very confident that, when you have these strong crosswinds or gusts or whatever it happens to be, that, you control it in the same way. The passengers would feel exactly the same thing. It's just that in the Boeing, you feel a little bit more connected. Long and short of all of this is it's really hard to pick between one or the other, because I love flying the Boeing, but I don't like sitting there for 6 hours in that flight deck. I don't particularly like flying the Airbus, but I love my office environment and the place to sit and do my job, the bulk of my job on these 6-hour flights. I like to be sat in the Airbus. I like that we have. I like that I have diagrams, electronic diagrams, systems diagrams available to me, and electronic checklists when things malfunction in the Airbus. On the Boeing, there's a little bit more. We've got to dig a little bit more, but we've got a really good quick reference handbook that
yeah,
solves most of the problems for us. It's really good. It's an excellent tool. It's hard to pick one over the other. I think if I was going to go, if we were going to go buy an Airbus or a Boeing today off of the lot, it would be very hard for me to pick. I'd probably, because now I'm older, I'd probably go for the Airbus because, you know, I'm more lazy.
yeah,
I like my comfy seat.
yeah, yeah. Um, and like just as a final question, you've been flying for like a very, very long time, and you've seen almost each and every single aspect of aviation. To somebody maybe like me who's just going into the field now, what kind of advice would you want to give them before they
Well,
begin?
so this industry is, we're talking about the airline industry, the airline industry, and many people I'm sure will say the same thing, is cyclical. You know,
Okay.
you have peaks and troughs. You have to learn how to ignore the noise during the peaks and the troughs and make your own decision through your career. At the moment, of course, depending on who you listen to, we have a pilot shortage. And
Yeah.
so the airlines have had to react to that and make it an incentivize to bring people into the industry. You know, it's an incredible time to get into the industry right now.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that tomorrow everything changes. We know about that. You know, we
Yeah.
know about the pandemic. We know about financial crashes. We know about terrorism. We know about all these things that can overnight change industries. And that can and probably will happen again, something that we're not, you know, we can't forecast. Um, but generally speaking, and you know, it's a good industry to get into. With that in mind, one of the pieces of advice that I was given that I would give to other people getting into this industry is don't react to news. Don't react to peaks and troughs. So if you make a decision to go to a particular airline, stick with that airline for an amount of time. Let's pretend, let's say 5 years. Let's say you make a commitment to an airline and give it 5 years. Um, During that 5 years, good things are going to happen and bad things are going to happen. Things are going to frustrate you. Things are going to make you really happy. If you emotionally react to all of those things during that 5 year period, you're and then you make a move to another airline, nothing's going to be fixed. You're just gonna go backwards in your career and start over again. So I would say ignore the noise, and at least give, maybe it's 3 years for you, maybe it's 4 or 5 years. I don't know. For me, it was five, and every 5 years, look back on the previous 5 years and think, okay, is this something I do I want to do another 5 years at this airline? Or do I want to change? Am I happy? You know, are things going in the right direction? Do I think long term things are going to go in the right direction? And and that will mean that in an industry where certainly in the US seniority is very important because it affects your quality of life considerably. And maybe not so much in other carriers in other airlines, but certainly it still exists. Seniority does give you benefits. So the longer you stay with the airline, the better your benefits are going to be. That's going to help um, to keep your career on track. Um, so that's the first thing. I would also say understand that this industry is incredibly small,
Yeah.
um, and so I I would. How can I say this politely? I'm not going to say it politely. Don't piss anybody off in this industry because it's um, it's so small, and everybody has a connection to everybody else. And the person that you annoy or you walk in with your ego and you belittle that person is the next person that's going to be the barrier to your next move, if that makes sense. That seems to be what happens in this industry. You know, I've flown with captains as a first officer at other airlines that are now my first officer only because of circumstance, because they joined the airline later than I did, and so it can happen both ways around. You invariably you meet up with people in this industry along the way, and so you have to be aware that this industry is really small, and people have connections. So I would definitely bear that in mind. And the last thing I'd say is that be sure to enjoy the experience. There are times where, especially in training, especially getting into this industry, there are frustrations. You have doubts, you have all of these emotions that could easily lead you to leave this industry or to really not enjoy the experience. The people expect you to, you need to know this stuff and blah 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 blah. Well, you can only do so much. We all have as much capacity as our brains have, and trying to sift through the things you really need to know and the other noise that is nice to know. That takes time. So there are frustrations, with flight training. Some people have issues with landings or steep turns or whatever it happens to be. Just keep going with it, because we all have those frustrations. Not everybody passes their check rides the first time around. It's fine. It doesn't define who you are. It's just a barrier. And the greatest strength that you can demonstrate is when you've had a barrier and you can push through it and you can overcome it. So if you find those things through your training, getting to your career, just keep going. Take the passion, take the determination, and just keep running with it, because it will come. But just enjoy it as much as you possibly can. It's when I think back, it seems to have gone like that.
Yeah.
And I look back. It's one of the nice things about Instagram, going and looking back at old photos and people and the experiences you've had. And it's a collection of photographs that you look at that you just think, wow, this is incredible that all of this has happened, and it's still happening today. So I must enjoy it. I've got to enjoy it today. And those are the three things that come to mind.
Okay.
But you'll be good.
Yeah. Thank you.
You'll be a pilot one day.
Yeah. Hopefully soon. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Captain Randall. I think we've gone almost for like an hour and a half now, but
Oh well.
yeah. Thank you so much for like taking the time just to answer my questions and responding to my invitation as well. I'll send you the link to this podcast very soon. And thank you so much for coming. Yeah.
It's been really enjoyable. Thank you, and thank you for your approach. It's been really, polite and professional, and you're an excellent host. Keep doing this. It's very, very interesting, and I'm sure you're going to be helping a lot of people. So keep doing it.
Sure. Yeah, sure.